any kind of free framework that is proven to work is not constricting you. It is liberating you, because I know that if I hit those marks, the screenplay will work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the same like a blueprint for building a house. I mean, if you don't have any blueprint, you might forget to put the foundation and pour the concrete and put rebar in. But if you have a blueprint, it's going to have 4 walls, it's going to have a roof, it's going to have a foundation. So it's the same with writing. And so the other thing that happens for business owners with a book is that you change the conversation. You are now the authority, because the root of authority is author. You have a gift that is perceived as very high value, but doesn't cost you that much to give. And it sits on the shelf. Like I've had people interview me on their radio or TV or podcast because they had one of my books sitting on their shelf. In fact, I was invited to contribute to one of the Chicken Soup for the Soul's books because the editor had one of my books that had been sitting on her shelf. And I was honored because she'd gone through multiple moves, but it made the cut every time.
Yeah.
And so, she pestered me with, to submit for that. So a book has a long tail. And unlike a business card or a brochure or a magazine, or even a podcast is perceived as news. So, even though yesterday's newspaper still has great information, people want to read today's newspaper, but it's not so with books. Books are legacy assets. So what people want to do is have a combination of legacy assets and live asset. I mean, books are special. I love books. A book is like a seed. A book has that unique quality, like a seed, that it can go for hundreds of miles and hundreds of years and still be viable when it's opened and given the right water of attention. And a book is also intimate. So it's like a one-on-one mentoring conversation you're having with the reader. And I've been blessed by so many mentors who are, not even cohorts of mine, like Ralph Waldo Emerson or C.S. Lewis or Wayne Dyer, who did actually endorse my first published book. I met him and gave me a big hug and he endorsed my book. We have a story, but he's passed on now, but I still listen to his audiobooks. And so I think the way to combat imposter syndrome, or discounting what we've learned syndrome, is what if it's not about you? What if you have a responsibility to make the world a better place? And what if the only way you can make the world a better place is by sharing things that you already know? Oh, I loved listening to your show. Pass the Secret Sauce is my new favorite podcast show. And I love the stories that some other guests have shared. I had somewhat similar to one of your guests whose name I space on. It was all about Sunday. It was all about Disney, watching the Disney Sunday. That was the treat of the week. But other nights, my father's a professor and my mother is a genius. So we would have the blackboard by the table and the encyclopedia and the humongous dictionary, the doorstop kind.
Yeah.
And so there was always like a teachable moment. And then my mom or my dad would get out, the map of the world or the dictionary or the thesaurus, or they would actually use the freaking blackboard table. But I loved it. And the other favorite game that we played, it wasn't like an official game, but it was something that we always did, is, okay, how can we brainstorm turning this into a business? We came up with so many
interesting
dollar business ideas. And my dad really frustrated me because he was an academic. So he didn't really start any businesses.
Yeah.
But my whole family, my two brothers.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting that they had that mindset to be able to, go that route. I mean, unfortunately, he didn't, like you said, he didn't have that follow through, but that's interesting that they were interested in having those kinds of conversations.
Yeah. Well, my father, he's still alive. He's an economist and he's written a couple of books about econometrics. So if you want some textbooks. Yeah. So he was very interested, but he was born in 1930. Scary thing to start a business. Well, you and I both know that from personal experience. It's a roller coaster ride.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
But not having lived through the Great Depression, perhaps not as terrified as some other people would be.
Yeah. So did you have siblings too growing up? Or?
Yeah. I am the ham in the sandwich, as my mother would like to say. I have an older brother, Dr. Calvin Winter, and I have a younger brother, Bryce. And they're like completely different. My older brother, he's so smart. He's a quantum physicist. and he knows 5 languages, but he's the kind of guy that actually, literally, I'm not exaggerating, would jog to high school carrying his briefcase.
Really? Oh, wow.
Okay, so he's like that archetype, the Einstein messy hair archetype. And then my younger brother is the diametrically opposed. He's like, he always looks like the cover of GQ magazine. He's gay. He's very tuned into color and beauty and has that aesthetic thing going on. And I got to enjoy both of those influences.
Yeah, I love
Yeah.
it. I love it. That's cool. That's very cool. So when were you first exposed to entrepreneurialism? You've done a lot of different things, but when would you say is the first?
Besides the brainstorming at the table, it was when my older brother said, "Hey, why don't I help him?" I grew up on a farm,
Mhm.
a hobby farm that got carried away. It was supposed to be a hobby farm.
What did you guys have? Was it
We ended up
animals or?
having 300 acres of corn silage and about 300 head of cattle.
Oh, wow.
Not dairy though,
Yeah.
beef, and 2 horses, which were mine.
Wow. Cool.
Oh, the question, entrepreneurship. So my older brother had some kind of deal going with my parents. So he said, "How about if I pay you, Aurora, 2 cents an hour to help me harvest the hay?" I'm like, "Okay." Later, I'm like, "Wait a minute, 2 cents an hour? That's not enough." Oh, and I was also in 4-H as a kid. So
Very
actually, I
cool.
won reserve grand champion with my Simmental at the time, who was named Biff Tech. So I didn't have any illusions.
Fifth tech?
Biff Tech, which is French for beef steak.
Ah, I see. Yeah.
Anyway, so entrepreneurialism started young and never really stopped. I don't think I'm very hireable.
Yeah. When did you realize that? We all have those kind of stories where, we've tried to get jobs and whatnot, but what types of stories did you have where you were trying to?
Well, I just get so I can see a great idea. And then when I had a couple of jobs in the film business and I would suggest the idea. And then it's like, things are moving as slow as a molasses. It's like watching paint dry. It was like
Yeah.
excruciatingly painful watching people either not be willing to jump on a good idea or not being able to say yes or not being able to execute. And I would get really frustrated. So I'm like, I'll do it. In fact,
Yep.
the first company I started, not the first company, sorry, that's wrong. One of the companies I started was a film and television production company. We raised $5 million and made 8 films. And it grew out of that impatience. I'm like, why can't you see how to do it? Okay, never mind. I'll just do it myself.
So what types of films did you guys make?
A variety of films, family films.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. So what happened next after your film company? Did that evolve into anything or?
I had 2 other companies before the film company, but the film company, I've always loved writing.
Mhm.
I've always loved story. I got into film because I wanted to tell stories, and I wanted to tell stories that would change the world. Like it's one of your missions to, change the world.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, what is more powerful than to tell somebody they should live a certain way or that something is good or to have a story about it? And I think, it's obvious the answer is that stories are far more persuasive because they get under our skin, they get into our hearts, they change the way we see the world, they can change how we perceive a hero. So after I had my film and television production company with a man that I was in love with, but then we broke up because he cheated on me. So then I thought, okay, well, how else can I? And then I had a job in film. And then I thought, well, what is a better way to express this love of story than to write books? Maybe I don't have to raise $20 million and have this. So then I started writing books. Well, I started writing books when I was 9, but they were mostly drawings of unicorns with a few words. But I just really leaned into my love of storytelling, and I've written and published a number of books, and I love helping people with their books. I also write fiction. I've written a bunch of screenplays.
Mhm.
So I leaned into that, but then I got distracted with another couple of businesses. But that happens every time. I'm like, oh, I have a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
Turn it into a business. Yeah.
Yep. No, exactly. So what were some of the things that you've written a number of books now. So what did you learn along the way about, frameworks or anything like that, crafting that story? Obviously you're an expert at crafting stories. any insights or tips on how to get that message out, or how to understand what it is that you should be writing about? Because I know for me, writing is like pulling teeth a lot of times. I just don't know what to write about, or is this interesting, not interesting? Any tips or
Oh,
advice or anything there?
so many tips. We could talk about this for many hours. Okay, so what are the most useful tips? Okay, the reason I wrote my most recent book, which is called Turn Words into Wealth, Blueprint for Your Business, Brand, and Book. The reason I wrote that was because of people like you asking me that kind of question, and people such as yourself, like you have such expertise. And I love this podcast because you have such curiosity and you've got a very quick mind and you're asking great questions. But so many people who have so much to offer don't write books because they don't know what to put down. So
Right.
if when you are in the right flow, when I'll get in a minute how to get there, it's not so much about getting it down. Like I can't type fast enough or dictate fast enough to get the ideas down because I don't have the idea. It has me.
Mhm.
So when when you've lined things up, so you're talking about your life experience, or you're talking about your areas of expertise, or you're talking about something that you're really passionate about, you probably can't get the words out fast enough, like I am right now. Like, so the main thing is to take a step back, and before you face that empty, blank, intimidating
Mhm.
page, consider, well, what am I doing here, and why am I doing it, and what really matters? So what I do with my clients, I have a process called spoken author. We first look at, okay, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to build your business? Are you trying to leave a legacy?
Mhm.
Uh, are you trying to explore your memoir and leave something for your grandchildren? What is the purpose? And then we talk about that a bit, and I understand what their goal is, and then given that, create a structure. So once somebody who is even not experienced at writing has a structure, then you can be interviewed by somebody like myself, or you can talk yourself onto any kind of iPhone app where
Mhm.
words can do the dictation, and away you go. So structure is your friend. When you have a map about where you're going, it's like a coloring book. You can just shade it in. It's not that hard. It's like when you have a blank piece of paper and you don't know what you're coloring, you don't have the outline. And just a quick story about that. When I first learned about screenwriting, I was like, what? This is so difficult.
Yeah.
You have to hit precise marks for, the inciting incident, and then the hook, and the first act turning point has to be like on page 20. And then the whole thing has to be, 110 pages. And you've got to have a mid act turning point and a act two turning point, and the hero has to arc. I'm like, how can I
Yeah.
do all of this? But actually, any kind of free framework that is proven to work is not constricting you. It is liberating you, because I know that if I hit those marks, the screenplay will work.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's the same like a blueprint for building a house. I mean, if you don't have any blueprint, you might forget to put the foundation and pour the concrete and put rebar in. But if you have a blueprint, it's going to have four walls, it's going to have a roof, it's going to have a foundation. So it's the same with writing. And that was a very long answer, and I have more to say, but I'll let you say something.
So no, I'm curious. The screenplay analogy, that's really interesting, because you mentioned there's whatever 10 different parts or 10 different things that you have to hit. Um, when you read, I'm assuming you've read a number of screenplays that weren't necessarily your own, right? Can you tell, did this person or did this writer do it correctly, and this one should be a hit, versus one that wasn't done correctly? And even if this one over here was a bad story, or a great story, but maybe they just didn't phrase this correctly, or structure it correctly. Does that make sense?
Well, I've read a lot of screenplays because I was head of development for Canada's largest film and television production company, then Atlantis Films. So I was responsible for over 250 hours of on-air programming.
Wow.
Means 10 or 100 times that in development
Yeah.
script. So yes, I am not God, so I'm not perfect.
Yeah.
We did pass on some really good projects that turned out to be home runs.
Yeah.
But you can basically tell. And there is more than one kind of movie structure. Most people would be familiar with the hero's journey
Yeah.
structure.
Right.
There's more than there's more than the hero's journey, although that is the most popular one. But a lot of first-time screenwriters are like a lot of first-time book authors. They are just winging it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Winging it is not good enough.
Yep.
And, it just takes too much money to make a movie. And it takes too much time to write a book, in my view, to do it without a plan. I would much rather work with somebody from the get-go when they're like, I have no idea, but I'm sure I have a book in me somewhere, than to work with somebody who's already spent, 2 years writing their manuscript and then brings me this mess,
Yeah.
which is hard to untangle.
Yeah, absolutely. So
But
what would you suggest people do if they do set out on this path to write a book? And like you said, some people have been writing it for years. I guess obviously it's probably best if they got put on this path originally, before they started. But say they have been working on this thing for a few years. Is there a way to be able to sort of deconstruct what they already have and then place it into this framework, or
absolutely. And I have a couple of quick tips and some recommended reading. So I wrote my whole book to answer this question. So you can get my book, Turn Words into Wealth, for free if you're listening in the month of May. So you can get it on Amazon or Kobo or Apple or wherever you get your books. So read that. It took me years to write it. It'll take you a day to read it, and it will get you off to a good start. Another great resource is the book called Story Grid, which is more around movie writing, but it's a really wonderful resource. And I believe you can also get that for free on his website, which I think is storygrid.com or something like that.
Okay.
But I think that the thing I want to take a 50,000 foot view for a moment, which is, first, your story matters. Your life experience matters. Your business expertise matters. And you may very well be the answer to somebody's prayers. So first off, consider, how can you make the world better? How can you change the world? What problems have you already solved? What problems do you wish that you hadn't gone down that rabbit hole of attempting to solve? Because that was a black hole of despair and desperation. You can save somebody that trouble. And then if you're in business, also consider, how could you attract your ideal client? So one of my clients, Justine and Janice Stone, they have a dentistry practice in San Diego, A+ Family Dentistry. And they were just like, they were great dentists, but attracting clients like every other dentist. And we worked together. I found out about their business. I came to understand that the average dental patient might spend $400, but somebody who's over 40 might spend $4,000 or $10,000 because they need more work. And they did have the expertise to do crowns and veneers and all that kind of stuff. So I suggested, how about a book, Keys to a Healthy Smile After 40? They loved it. So then I interviewed them and produced the book for them, and their business grew from 1.5 to 6 million. Wow. So it makes a huge difference if you reverse engineer it. And if you are a business owner, if you can attract your ideal client for 10x the amount or 20x the amount that an average client is, if your book can be used to reposition you as the go-to expert, that would be super smart.
Absolutely.
So their book actually contains a lot of interesting personal stories. They grew up in Vietnam and they were in a concentration camp. But if the book had been named something about, going from Vietnam to America, that would not have increased their business as much.
Yeah.
So reverse engineer it and see how you can highlight the value that you already add as a business owner, and provide a book that would appeal to many people and would benefit many people. But you don't have to explain, your 29-step process of dentistry or sprocketizing. You just need to become somebody that they know, like, and trust. And then the right people will, come to you, Matt, if they want to sprocketize their business, or go to them if they want to have a healthy smile after 40. That partly answered your question. What else would you like to know?
So I'm curious. So we have the book here now, right? And you mentioned this dental practice that grew 5 times, 6 times. that wouldn't have necessarily happened just by writing the book. There's obviously a lot of promotions and other things that wrap into that as well. So can you talk a little bit about some of the techniques of getting the book to be seen?
Absolutely. And we've got to do this with your book, Sprocketize.
Yes.
Um, I think that the main thing is for people to understand, like in the book, Turn Words to Wealth, I give a whole bunch of examples and 7 different models that you can use to monetize your book and make 7 figures or so, depending on where you start, obviously. And none of those ways are by selling books. That's the 8th way,
Yeah.
the 8th wonder of the world. So ways to monetize your book. Firstly, it wasn't only their book that helped them. It was understanding who their ideal client was, beginning to speak that language, positioning as the go-to experts for people over 40, offering the book as a bonus for people who comes in, and that increased their referrals. They already had a lot of referrals because they were Janice and Justine Doan are amazing dentists, and really kind and lovely ladies. But if you give somebody a book, it's so much easier for them to make a referral. They can either say, here, these are my dentists, read this book. It's pretty cool. Or they can say, hey, you can get this book on Amazon. These are my dentists. And it also created a higher awareness within their profession. Like they were top 40 under 40 dentists in America. And there was a seminar about that. And they were autographing books to their peers.
Yeah.
And because the last time they'd been at that conference, they were equals. But this time, because they were published authors, they were a step ahead. So there's also this level of persuasion that Robert Cialdini, the author of Influence, talks about in his book called Persuasion. And so the other thing that happens for business owners with a book is that you change the conversation. You are now the authority, because the root of authority is author. You have a gift that is perceived as very high value, but doesn't cost you that much to give. And it sits on the shelf. Like I've had people interview me on their radio or TV or podcast because they had one of my books sitting on their shelf. In fact, I was invited to contribute to one of the Chicken Soup for the Souls books because the editor had one of my books that had been sitting on her shelf. And I was honored because she'd gone through multiple moves, but it made the cut every time.
Yeah.
And so, she pestered me with, to submit for that. So a book has a long tail. And unlike a business card or a brochure or a magazine, or even a podcast is perceived as news. So, even though yesterday's newspaper still has great information, people want to read today's newspaper, but it's not so with books. Books are legacy assets. So what people want to do is have a combination of legacy assets and live assets. But writing a book, obviously, I have an MBA. Well, not obviously. I do have an MBA. And obviously, therefore, I make a business case for why, especially for entrepreneurs, writing a book is the highest leverage marketing tool you can have is your own book, once you know how to market it, which we'll get to in just a second. But I want to emphasize that really there's such a huge value in listening to yourself and honoring your life experience and seeing if you can distill the essence of what you learned so that you can share it with others. So how to market the book? Well, firstly, it'd be good if people knew about it. So for your book, Sprocketize, people can go to Amazon and get Sprocketize, I would assume. But why not, make it a practice that you mail a copy of your book to every new client, or that you give it out, at Christmas or whatever might be an appropriate time, or you send it to somebody on their birthday. So it just becomes part of the conversation, and that you leverage it that way. Obviously, there's lots of marketing to be done. You can advertise on wherever might be the appropriate vehicle for you, but you can do Amazon ads, you can do Facebook ads, you can drive people to your book, and you can apply for book awards. Like my book has been honored as the 2021 Business Book of the Year by the LA Book Festival, and honored with a couple other book awards. But I'm applying for book awards partly because it's cool to have awards, but also to get the word out, right? So you spent all this time writing Sprocketize. Maybe you want to write another book like we talked about before we started recording, like a Tim Ferriss sort of Tools of Titans from these podcast interviews. And why not just consider it an extra value that you can add and work it into your routine. So Dan Sullivan, who's the founder of Strategic Coach, I mean, he writes a book every quarter, little books, little short books.
Yep.
But I think that this show is great, and why not consider how else you can add value to people in
No,
different.
absolutely. And so you've touched on this a couple of times, and I've kind of felt this, like, deep down, and I do this with a lot of different things. I'm curious to get your perspective on it, but you know, I think that a lot of people struggle with this as well, where once you know something, once you've published something or you've learned something, you think, oh, well, everybody else already knows that, right? That, like, this is such common knowledge.
Yeah.
And then it kind of downplays what you just did. Like, you put all your knowledge into this book, and it's like, okay, well, that's all, everybody knows all that stuff that I just put in there. So I guess I don't even know what the question is there, but is that something that a lot of people?
I love that you brought this up, Matt. I don't know if we'd call that the imposter syndrome or something like that, but there is that tendency, once you've done something, like, before I had my MBA, I wanted to get one for years. And now that I've got one, I'm like, yeah, well, we just got an MBA.
Yeah.
It's no big deal. Then we do ourselves such a disservice. It's kind of how our brain works, though. We're always looking for what's missing, or we're looking for what's next.
Right.
And we tend to diminish and discount what has already been done. But a good way one way to overcome that I've found helpful is the Stoic philosophy, memento mori. So if you were to die tomorrow, what would you regret that you hadn't put in a book,
Mm-hmm.
or you hadn't put into your business or into your podcast, or whatever the case may be? And so, for example, my mother died recently. And when she passed, I was grateful for two things. I was grateful that I was there when she took her last breath,
Mm-hmm.
because she was there when I took my first breath, and it seemed appropriate.
Yeah.
I was also glad that I had interviewed her over a course of several months. So I have about 10 hours of audio interviews, so that her stories won't be lost over time.
Yeah.
Because, you talk to your mother all the time. So I've heard that story a bunch of times, but you'd be surprised how quickly you forget. And so that was so precious to me that I had captured that.
Yeah.
And so I think we books are special. I love books. A book is like a seed. A book has that unique quality, like a seed, that it can go for hundreds of miles and hundreds of years and still be viable when it's opened and given the right water of attention. And a book is also intimate. So it's like a one-on-one mentoring conversation you're having with the reader. And I've been blessed by so many mentors who are, not even cohorts of mine, like Ralph Waldo Emerson or C.S. Lewis or Wayne Dyer, who did actually endorse my first published book. I met him and gave me a big hug, and he endorsed my book. We have a story, but he's passed on now, but I still listen to his audiobooks.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the way to combat imposter syndrome, or discounting what we've learned syndrome, is, what if it's not about you?
Mm-hmm.
What if you have a responsibility to make the world a better place? Yeah. And what if the only way you can make the world a better place is by sharing things that you already know? Like, duh. You don't know it yet. It might not be as helpful to say, I'm floundering. You might want to try this too. No, it's like, I figured this out. You might want to try this too. Or I floundered, and don't go there. Does that make sense?
I like that mindset. And again, I think, it's all about, getting over yourself and getting over your limiting beliefs, and, the I'm not good enough, or this isn't good enough philosophy. And I like that framework of, kind of taking a step back and, looking at it as, what am I going to leave, if I was to die tomorrow? What can I pass on if I was to?
But to be completely transparent, Matt, I have done that to my books. I'm like, well, everybody knows that now, and then I haven't marketed them and I haven't bothered. But what will be encouraging for you with your book Sprocketize is over 67% of book sales are from previously published books called back matter. So now that I'm all excited about Amazon and international distribution, and now that ebooks have gotten a big boost to acceptance due to the COVID and the pandemic, people are like, I think I'll order the ebook. I I am revivifying all my back matter and perhaps changing the title or actually getting the marketing to work online, because previously I was all about, hey, giving people a soft cover book and
Yeah.
just connecting with my list. So it's for you and for everybody else who's perhaps got something on the shelf or potentially on the shelf. Like, it's not too late. You can still make a difference with it.
Yeah.
And I think we should, everybody who's a communicator or a thought leader or who's learning and evolving as they go, I think we should make it part of our approach. Why not write a book
Mhm.
a book a year, or as Anne
Learn
Sullivan
together
says,
and
every 90 days.
yeah, learn together and experience everything together, and you'll pass it on. So this is really interesting. If people want to learn more about you, your well, obviously you have your book, but what would you say is the best way to get in touch with you, or again learn more about some of the things that you've done?
Well, the best way to learn more is to get the book Turn Words into Wealth, Blueprint for Your Business Brand and Book, especially if you get it in May, 'cause it's absolutely free. The ebook is free on Amazon, Apple, Kobo, and wherever books are sold. If people would like to learn more, they could go to my website, which is my name, aurorawinter.com. And the best way to connect with me is LinkedIn. I'm a big fan of Cal Newport's book, Deep Work. So I'm not all about scattering my energy over gazillion different social media platforms, but you can direct message me on LinkedIn, and I'll be glad to help.
Very cool. And real quick too, did you write the book for any one particular person, whether it be an entrepreneur or industry or anything like that? Any insights into who would benefit the most from it, would you say?
My most recent book, Turn Words into Wealth, really, I wrote it primarily for an entrepreneur or thought leader who has some life experience or business experience, but who has the thought, I'm not a writer. How am I going to write a book?
Yeah.
Or why should I even write a book? Or why me? But it is also for people who have a burning message, but have no idea how authors actually make money.
Yeah.
Like, most people don't know that New York Times bestselling authors typically make 85% of their money from other things besides book sales. So
Yeah.
it just made me so sad. It makes me so sad when people don't honor their stories and share their stories. And I especially like people to share their stories in a book. But the other thing that makes me really sad is when people go to all the trouble of writing a book, Matt, and
Yes.
then have no idea how to monetize it. And so
Yeah.
the book is this beautiful jewel that's hidden away and that nobody gets the chance to benefit from. And that's simply because they it's not their fault. They don't understand how authors typically monetize books. It's like an iceberg. We can see the top, we can see the book, but we don't see all the business
Yeah.
that is underneath it. So Turn Words into Wealth, I hope, will solve those two problems for the readers.
I love it. I love it, Aurora. This is fantastic. And I'm sure that there's all kinds of avenues that we could go off into. So maybe we could do this again sometime and dive deep into some of those different avenues. But really
Absolutely,
appreciate
Matt.
the
Such a pleasure connecting with you. You're a load of fun.
time.
We'll
Thank
do
you.
it again.